Hi, welcome back to the Mayor Make It YouTube channel. Today we're going to make some cornhole boards. Almost. Not as close. Yay! So before making those boards that you just saw, I'm actually going to make a jig for making these easier. Because the trickiest part is normally getting the hole in the middle to actually be in the right place and actually cut it out. So if you cut it out with a jigsaw, you normally can't get a very good circle, and you gotta do a lot of sanding to clean it up. And you can cut it out with a hole saw, but that requires a 6-inch hole saw, which is kind of expensive. And cutting it out with a router can get you a nice clean circle if you use a circle cutting jig, which is essentially what I'm going to do here when making the jig. And then in the future, I can just set this jig on top of the board, and it'll have a frame around it to where it just lines up, it's centered, it's ready to go, and then I just use my router to route out the circle. So here I'm just making a plywood base that my router will sit on, and the edge of the bit will be 3 inches away from the mark I made for the plywood base to get screwed down into the center of where I need my hole on the jig. And you'll see in a minute, so essentially it'll rotate around that center pivot point. It'll give me a 6-inch circle that's centered on there. And then you'll see how I use that on the actual boards here in a bit. And this I'm just drilling a hole so the router bit can start in that hole and then go around. Because it's not a plunge router, I didn't really have a way to get it to plunge down without giving me some issues. And I also didn't really have a way to get the dust and the chips out of where I was routing, so I would just pause and use my air compressor to blow the chips out, and then each revolution lower the bit a little bit. Then I had to pause for a minute here and enlarge the hole in the plywood that my bit was going through, because it wasn't big enough for the nut that tightens the collet on the router. So I got that enlarged and then got the final pass done. And then here I just had to be slow on the final bit, because when you finish cutting through, of course there's nothing holding that in place anymore. So if you're not careful and you're just going willy-nilly with it, you can just gouge the side of your circle and ruin all the work you just did. And then I just cut that off with a circular saw, so I could build up this frame around it, and this frame will be what helps it sit in place on the actual cornhole boards. And these are just glued and brad nailed in place. And that's about it for the jig. Just makes making cornhole boards in the future much easier. And then I just ripped a 4x4 sheet of plywood right in half. And here you can see how I'm using the jig, just a router bit with a bushing on it to follow the pattern, and then get the cut started, and you can take the jig off and finish it up. Makes it nice and simple, a nice clean circle. And then I just moved on to cutting the frame for the boards. Just kind of lined these up, measured and cut as I went. And it was a pretty straightforward process. Just clamp them in place so you can measure and make sure they fit nice and snug. And then once I had them all cut, I just went back to the table saw and cut about a 1/4 inch off of one side of them to get rid of the rounded over corners. And then on one of the ends, on one of the boards, I'm routing in grooves here for a sliding door, sliding panel, really, that you can use to store the bags and the pins for keeping score. And then it's just a matter of breaking out the clamps and the glue and getting the frame attached to the bottom. and then removing all the clamps. And this is the board that doesn't have the panel in the bottom. And then just for a little extra reinforcement, adding screws, but I drilled out recesses for the screws to sit in, and then plugged those with this 3/4 inch cherry dowel that I had, just because I had it left over from the last set of cornhole boards that I made. And it just gives it a little nice touch around the edge of the plywood. Here I'm just squaring up the corners with my very awesome chisel work. And here's where I realized that I goofed again. When routing the grooves for that panel, I routed them wrong so that these frames would have had to go like this, which obviously the channel's on the wrong side of the thing. So a little bit later, when I had them on the right side, and I actually had things in the right order, I cut the panel to fit, cut it down to size, and then once I had it the right width, I grabbed the set of bags that I have and just kind of measured how much it would have to cover, and then cut it to the right length. And now here I am marking out one of the end boards that will have these holes spaced for keeping score. I 3D printed some score pegs that you can put in there. And this, it was late at night, so I didn't want to run any of my saws, my power saws, so I was like, what the heck, I'll cut some of these by hand, which wasn't too bad. The saw worked really nice. Issue was with my measurement. I was off by quite a bit, so all of that hand sawing I had to redo. I didn't film me redoing it with a miter saw, but I actually had to go pick up another 2x4 because I biffed that pretty hard. And then this can of pre-stain conditioner worked quite well for marking the round tops, and this is still on the short legs. So here I am trying to sand them down and get them nice and round before realizing that they just ain't long enough. So I go through all the work of getting them drilled out and installed, get them lined up in the right place, and I think it's right about here where I just look at it and I'm like, that doesn't look tall enough. And yeah, it's because it wasn't tall enough, and it was a bummer. But since I couldn't do anything else with the legs, I took to kind of cleaning up the plywood and the edges a little bit. Just start sanding things. Get a head start on that because it's everybody's favorite process. So, but now once I had the right size legs, I could go ahead and get those put in. And I didn't take the time to get them all nice and rounded over again. Nobody really sees that part anyway, so I figured it was fine. And then you just take and have the leg hang over a surface like that so you can mark a straight line so you know where to cut it off, where it'll sit level in the ground. And just do that with each of the legs. And it was on to paint. I was making these for a buddy's wife's birthday. He wanted to surprise her with them, and he asked well, he said her favorite color was purple when I asked if he wanted a certain color. But then he also said that he didn't want them too purple. So I figured just with the base being purple and then just inside the hole being purple would be just enough. And it sounds like they are. It sounds like they're both happy with them. And then I finished it with a few coats. I think I ended up doing 3 coats of spar urethane to try to protect it from not so much moisture, since it's Arizona. That doesn't happen a lot. But the heat and sunshine, I thought maybe this would do pretty good. And now I'm just getting the final touches on that panel that lets you store the bags and stuff, which is just a matter of marking things out and then getting it drilled out. It might have been easier to do this before everything was glued together, but I didn't know that at the time, and it worked out fine. And then a nice coat of paste wax on all the surfaces that are going to be sliding really helped it. You could immediately tell the difference when I had that applied. And then I just applied it to the bottom just to protect it from any other moisture or anything that might get into the bottom of it. And then it's just a matter of the finishing touches. Here I'm just putting the legs on. I got washers between the legs and the base, and then the leg and the nuts. I put 2 nuts on, kind of lock them in place to make sure that it doesn't work itself loose. And then I threw a handle on each one of the boards just to make it a little bit easier to carry them. And then I just grabbed some white paint and a paintbrush and painted the numbers onto the score track. And I actually ended up with an extra hole here, so I guess if you want to play the 22 instead of 21 you can. But I didn't paint 22 on there, I just went to 21 and then painted the word win really big. In fact, I think I just painted win, I don't think I painted 21. We'll find out here in a minute. Yeah, it looks like it's just win over there. Bloop, winner. And this one is done. Another fun project. I think this is something that once people know you do any kind of woodworking, you're gonna have at least one person ask you to make these for you. And that's also why I made the jig, because I'm not gonna be surprised if somebody else wants some eventually, or if I want to make another set. They're a pretty simple project to make, to just get rid of some scrap plywood or 2x4 pieces or whatever. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you want to see what I'm up to on a more regular basis between videos, follow me on Instagram @BearMaking. Otherwise, I'm going to get going. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.